That uniform is a costume." She said it clearly, loud enough for the nearest table to stop talking, loud enough for Gerald to look down at his plate, loud enough for Daniel to go completely still beside me. I didn't look at her. I reached forward, picked up my beret, folded it once, and set it flat on the table in front of me. Then I folded my hands on top of it. And I said nothing. That was Veterans Day, November 11th, the VFW hall on Crescent Street, where the Voss family had been gathering for over a decade before I ever existed in their lives. Folding tables pushed together with white paper tablecloths, small American flags in plastic holders at the center of each one, the smell of industrial coffee and someone's overcooked green bean casserole drifting from the back kitchen, holiday lights strung along the upper walls, half of them burned out, a small podium at the front of the room with a microphone no one had touched yet. 23 people, Daniel's parents, his aunt and uncle from Clarksburg, 3 of his cousins, 2 neighbors from the street he grew up on, a few of his father's old friends from the mill, thick-necked men in their 60s who shook hands like they were trying to prove something, and the Haverson family, who had known the Vosses since before Daniel was born, seated directly across from us. All of them watching. All of them waiting to see what I would do. My name is Alina Voss. I was 34 years old that night. Sergeant First Class, United States Army, 11 years of service, 2 combat tour, a record that had been classified for 8 of those 11 years for reasons I was never permitted to discuss, not with neighbors, not with friends, and not with the family of the man I had married. I had a bronze star with valor sitting in a citation folder in our home. It had been declassified 6 weeks before that dinner. I had not shown it to anyone. Not even Daniel. I want you to remember that part. Before I tell you what Brigadier General Sandra Ackafer said when she walked through the door of that VFW hall, I want to ask you something. Leave your answer in the comments. If your husband sat completely still while his mother accused you of stolen valor in front of 23 people, not one word, not one hand on your arm, not one look that said he was sorry, would you have spoken? Or would you have waited for the room to do it for you? I already know what I did, but I want to know what you would have done. I need to go back, because what happened at the VFW hall did not start that night. It started the first time Daniel brought me home, 3 years before we were married, when I was 28 years old and still carrying the particular kind of silence that comes from years of being trained not to react to anything in public. Daniel and I met at a physical therapy clinic in Fort Benning, Georgia. He was there visiting a college friend who had broken his collarbone playing pickup basketball. I was there because my left knee had taken shrapnel from an IED blast 6 weeks earlier, and I was relearning how to walk without compensating. I was in civilian clothes, a gray t-shirt, black sweatpants, running shoes with the left one barely laced because of the bandaging. My hair was down, which I almost never did anywhere that wasn't my own apartment. He didn't know I was military, not then. He asked if the coffee machine in the waiting room was broken, because he had been pressing the button for 3 minutes and nothing was happening. I told him you had to hold it for 2 full seconds before releasing, or it wouldn't register. He said that was a terrible design. I said most things worth having require you to hold on longer than feels comfortable. He looked at me for a moment, then he laughed. We talked for 40 minutes while his friend was in a session. He was an electrical engineer. He worked for a firm in Columbus, Ohio. He had a quiet way of speaking that I noticed immediately. He didn't fill silence with noise, which was unusual. Most people I knew outside the military were uncomfortable with silence. They treated it like a problem to be solved. Daniel just let it exist. He asked for my number when the session ended. I gave it to him. 2 weeks later, we had dinner. A month after that, we were talking every day. 6 months after that, he drove down to see me on a weekend I happened to have off and asked me, very directly, what the scar on my left knee was from. I told him I had been in an accident overseas. He didn't push, he just nodded. That was the first thing I loved about him. He accepted the shape of what I could give him without demanding the parts I wasn't allowed to share. The problem was his mother. Patricia Voss was 62 years old, and she had spent most of her adult life being the loudest woman in any room she entered. Not loud in the way of someone who has something to say, loud in the way of someone who needs to be the authority on everything, at all times, or something inside them goes wrong. She had opinions about food, about furniture, about the way people dressed, about whether your voice was too quiet, about whether your posture communicated sufficient respect for the Voss family name. Gerald, his father, was a large, quiet man who had worked 30 years at the paper mill and had learned that the path of least resistance was agreement. He didn't start arguments. He didn't finish them. He simply waited for Patricia to be done and then nodded. Daniel loved his mother. I had no interest in being the woman who came between them. That was not a role I wanted. But Patricia had decided, from the first evening Daniel brought me home, that I was a problem. I remember that night clearly. I wore a dark blue dress. I brought a bottle of wine I had asked 3 people which one to bring. I shook Gerald's hand. I helped clear the table without being asked. Patricia watched me the entire evening with the particular expression of a woman who has already reached a verdict and is simply collecting evidence to support it. At the end of the night, as Daniel and I drove away, he said, "She'll warm up. She just needs time." She had 7 years. She never warmed up. The comments began small. They always do. The first one that I remember registering was at Thanksgiving, 8 months after Daniel and I started dadding. Patricia asked me, over the turkey, whether I had considered a different career path. Something more stable, she said. Something with a future. I said the Army had been a reliable career for me. She smiled. But for how long? You can't do it forever. And what happens when you're done? What do you have? I told her I had a degree in civil engineering. I told her I had skills that translated directly to multiple industries. I told her this calmly, without heat, the way I had been trained to respond to unexpected pressure. Give information, don't escalate, keep your voice level. She tilted her head. I just wonder sometimes if Daniel has thought through what this life really looks like, all the moving around, the not knowing. Daniel, to his credit, said, "Mom," just that, just her name. She smiled again and changed the subject to the cranberry sauce. But it didn't stop. Over the next 2 years, the comments built into a structure. A scaffolding of small doubts that Patricia erected around me, piece by piece, in front of whoever happened to be in the room. She told Daniel's aunt that she worried he was sacrificing his future for a woman who wasn't really present in the relationship. She said this at a birthday party I attended, not realizing I had stepped back into the room. She told the Haverson woman, Janet Haverson, who was seated directly across from us at the VFW hall that night, that my military career was probably not what Alina makes it sound like. She said she had tried to look up some of what I described, and she couldn't find any record of it. She said this to Janet in the parking lot of a grocery store, and Janet, to her credit, told Daniel about it the following week. I know about things I am never supposed to know about because I spent 11 years learning how to be quiet in rooms where people assume they are not being listened to. When Daniel and I got engaged, Patricia took him to lunch alone and told him she thought he was making a mistake. She said she didn't trust me. She said there was something I wasn't telling him. She said a woman who couldn't talk about her own life was a woman with something to hide. She was not entirely wrong about the last part. I did have something I couldn't talk about, but hiding and classified are not the same word, and Patricia Voss had never understood the difference. Daniel told me about that lunch. He told me what she said. He also told me he had defended me, that he had told her she was wrong, that he had told her Alina is the most honest person I have ever met, and I believe that is true. But he still went to the lunch. And he still didn't tell her to stop. And 3 years later, he still sat completely still while she called my uniform a costume. There is a distance between defending someone when you are asked and protecting someone before they need to be defended. I understood that distance by the time we were seated at that VFW table. I had measured it exactly. It got worse after we were married. The ceremony was small. A chapel on base, 16 people, a reception at a restaurant with round tables and good bread. Patricia wore black, which I chose not to comment on. She gave a toast that contained, in its final sentence, the phrase, "We hope Alina finds what she's looking for in this family," which sat in the room for a moment before people started clapping because they didn't know what else to do. Gerald hugged me after. He said quietly, "She'll come around." He had been saying that for 3 years. I had stopped believing him after 18 months. The first year of marriage, Patricia called Daniel 4 times to ask whether I had gotten any clearer about my service record. She said she had a cousin who was in the army, and he had been able to tell his family exactly what he did and where he went, and she didn't understand why I couldn't do the same. Daniel told her each time that it was complicated, that there were things I wasn't permitted to discuss, that he trusted me, that she needed to as well. She told him once that she thought I was using the military as a shield, that I hid behind the word classified to avoid intimacy. She had underlined a relevant section of something she read and left it on Daniel's childhood desk the next time he visited alone. The kind of move I filed away in the part of my memory reserved for things I would never bring up but never forget. The uniform comments started the second year of our marriage. They began as questions. Is that the right way to wear that? At the one family event I attended in uniform, I thought the patches went on the other side. They progressed to observations. I looked that up and I'm not sure that's the correct insignia for that rank. They became statements by the third year. I don't think that's a real decoration. And then they became what she said at the VFW hall, openly, in front of everyone. The week before Veterans Day, Daniel's father called him and asked if we would come to the VFW dinner. It was an annual thing for the family. Gerald had friends there from the mill who were veterans. There was usually a speaker. There was always bad coffee and the green bean casserole. Daniel said yes before asking me. I want to be fair about this. He asked me afterward with genuine warmth. He said it would mean a lot to his dad. He said it was just dinner. He said he thought it might be good. Being around other veterans might make his mother understand my service better. He thought proximity to the thing she was denying might change her mind. I said yes. I wore my dress uniform, not because I was trying to make a statement, because it was a Veterans Day event at a VFW hall and it was appropriate. I polished my shoes. I pinned my ribbons correctly because I have never in 11 years pinned them incorrectly. I put on my beret. I drove to the hall with my husband. The citation folder, the bronze star with valor, declassified 6 weeks earlier, in a manila envelope on the shelf in our home office. I left it home. Not because I was hiding it, because I hadn't decided how to tell him. Because explaining that citation meant explaining the operation, and explaining that operation meant giving him a version of those 8 months I had spent 3 years trying to organize into something I could say out loud. I was going to tell him. I just hadn't found the right moment. And then we walked into the VFW hall. We were 40 minutes into dinner when it happened. The food had been passed. Gerald was deep in a conversation with his mill friends about a baseball team neither of them had followed in years. Daniel's cousin was showing someone a video on his phone. Janet Haverson was telling Daniel's aunt about a home renovation project that had gone wrong. The hall was warm and loud and smelled like old wood and coffee and whatever was in the casserole. Patricia had been quiet through most of the meal. That was unusual. She was watching me. I noticed it the way I notice everything in a room peripherally, without reacting, without adjusting what I was doing. I kept my posture correct. I ate. I answered questions when asked. I did not perform ease, but I also did not perform discomfort. It was Janet Haverson who opened it. She looked at my ribbons, the way people often do when they're trying to be polite and interested, and she said, "Alina, I keep meaning to ask, what's that one mean?" She pointed to the row on my left breast. I began to explain the service ribbons, calmly, factually. I named the campaigns. I gave brief context. Janet was genuinely interested and asked follow-up questions, which I answered. And then Patricia set down her fork. "That uniform is a costume," she said. The table went quiet first, then the nearest table. She was looking at my rank patches. Her voice was completely steady, which told me she had been deciding to say this for a long time. This was not an impulse. This was a decision she had made before she sat down. "I'm sorry," Janet said. "The patches," Patricia said, gesturing toward my shoulders. "The rank, I looked it up. You can buy these online. You can order the whole thing. Uniform, patches, ribbons, all of it. People do it. I've read about it." I looked at her. I did not look away. I did not speak. "I don't know what Alina actually did in the army," she continued. "She has never been able to tell us. She has never been able to explain where she was or what she did or why it's all such a big secret. And I'm sorry, but I have been sitting here for 3 years listening to people talk about her service like it's something verified, and I don't think it is. I think there's something very wrong with this picture." Gerald said, "Patricia." "No," she said. "I have been quiet for a long time. We are in a VFW hall. There are real veterans in this room. And I am not going to sit here and watch my son's wife use a uniform she bought online to play the hero while people like Gerald's friends." She gestured toward the mill men, "actually served. It is disrespectful, and somebody should have said it a long time ago." The room was fully silent now, all 3 tables. Daniel's hand was flat on the tablecloth, not moving. I looked at him for one moment, one full second. I wanted to see what he would do. He did not speak. I looked back at Patricia. I looked at my beret, which was sitting on the table beside my plate where I had set it when we sat down, because you do not wear a cover indoors. I picked it up. I folded it once along the crown. I set it flat in front of me. I placed my hands on top of it. And I said nothing. Because I knew something Patricia Voss did not know. I knew what was in the folder I had left at home. I knew the date on that citation. I knew the operation it named. I knew what I had done on that date, in that place, and I knew, with the particular calm certainty of someone who has been trained to function in conditions far worse than a VFW hall in Ohio, that I did not need to be the one to say it. Before I tell you what happened when that door opened, I want to ask you this. Daniel sat completely still while his mother called my uniform a costume. He said nothing, not one word. If you were in my position, if the proof was coming and you knew it, and your husband had just shown you exactly who he was in the moment it mattered, would you have forgiven him after the room went quiet? I want to know what you think. Tell me in the comments. Let me tell you what was in that folder. In April, 8 years before that Veterans Day dinner, I was deployed with a small unit to a region I am still not going to name specifically, because some details remain restricted even after a record is declassified, and some habits do not break. We were not a combat unit in the traditional sense. Our role was advisory and support, which is a phrase that sounds administrative and is, in practice, frequently the opposite of administrative. We were embedded with a partner force. We were 7 Americans. The nearest additional U.S. support was 40 minutes by air. On the 14th day of that deployment, at approximately 3:40 in the morning, our position was compromised. I will not describe exactly what happened in the following 4 hours, because that is not the story I am telling tonight. What I will tell you is that at the end of those 4 hours, all 7 Americans were alive. 2 partner force personnel who would not have been alive without specific actions taken by specific people were alive. And I had a piece of shrapnel in my left knee that would require 6 weeks of physical therapy and cause me intermittent pain on cold mornings for the rest of my life. The after-action report was classified. The unit's operations were classified. The awards that came out of that deployment were classified. I was told that the classification would be reviewed periodically and that I would be notified if anything changed. 6 weeks before the VFW dinner, I received a letter. The letter informed me that the classification had been lifted, that the Bronze Star with Valor awarded for my actions on that deployment was now part of my official public service record, that a formal presentation would be arranged at my request, or alternatively, that the citation could be mailed to me directly. I requested the citation by mail. It arrived in a manila envelope. I opened it at the kitchen counter on a Tuesday morning while Daniel was at work. I read it once. I put it back in the envelope. I set it on the shelf in the home office, and I thought about how to tell my husband that the 8 years of silence he had respected without demanding explanation had contained this. I had not found the right words yet. But Brigadier General Sandra Ackerfer didn't need my words. She had her own. The door of the VFW hall opened at 7:43 in the evening. I know the exact time because I was looking at the clock on the wall behind Patricia's head. I had been counting the seconds of silence since she finished speaking and needed something to anchor my eyes to that wasn't her face or my husband's hands. The VFW post commander, a man named Bill Eckhart, retired Navy, stood up when the door opened. His posture changed completely. The kind of automatic response to authority that people who have served recognize immediately. 3 people walked in, 2 in Army dress uniforms, 1 in the center. Brigadier General Sandra Ackerfer was 52 years old. A black woman, compact and precise, with close-cropped silver-streaked hair and the stillness of someone who did not waste movement. She wore her dress uniform the way a person wears something they have earned every square inch of. Stars on her shoulders. Ribbons across her chest that told a longer story than anyone in that room had time to read. She carried a folder under her left arm. She had not been announced. There had been no mention of a guest speaker in the printed program Bill Eckhart had set at each place setting. I found out later that she had been passing through Columbus on her way to a base in Indiana and had agreed, at Bill's personal request, to stop in for 20 minutes as a surprise for the post's Veterans Day dinner. She had no knowledge of the Voss family. She had no knowledge of what had just happened at our table. She had no knowledge that I was sitting 17 feet from the podium, with my hands folded over my beret, waiting. Bill Eckhart went to her. They shook hands and exchanged a few words. He pointed toward the podium. She nodded. Then she stopped. She was looking at our table. Specifically, she was looking at me. I don't know if it was the uniform. I don't know if it was the way I was sitting. I don't know if it was something in the quality of the stillness I was maintaining that she recognized the way people who have been in certain situations recognize it in each other without introduction. Whatever it was, she looked at me for approximately 2 seconds. Then she looked at Bill. She said something. He responded. She looked at me again. She walked to the podium. She introduced herself. Her name, her rank, her current assignment. Her voice was clear and even and carried to every corner of the room without effort. She thanked Bill and the post for the work they did. She spoke for 3 minutes about the meaning of the day, and she spoke without notes, which I noticed. Then she opened the folder she had been carrying under her arm. "Before I close," she said, "I need to do something I was not planning to do tonight, but that I believe this room is the right place for." She looked at our table. "Is Sergeant First Class Alina Voss present?" The room did not move. I stood up. It was automatic. You do not stay seated when a general asks if you are present. You stand. "Present, General," I said. She nodded once. "I have in front of me," she said, and her voice was carrying to every person in that hall, the bronze star with Valor Citation for Sergeant First Class Alina Voss, covering actions on the 14th of April during classified forward advisory operations. She paused. "This award was recently declassified. I was not aware that Sergeant First Class Voss was in this building until 60 seconds ago. But given where we are and what day it is, I think it would be wrong to be in the same room and say nothing." She read the citation. She read all of it. She read the date. She read the location designation, the unit identifier, the description of the hostile contact, and the specific actions attributed to me. She read the words above and beyond the call of duty. She read the phrase conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life, which is the specific language required for that particular decoration, and which is not language that appears in citations for service that is purchased online or invented for the purpose of impressing a mother-in-law at a family dinner. She read every word. The hall was completely silent. I stood with my hands at my sides and my beret in my left hand, and I looked at a point on the wall above the general's head the way I had been taught to stand at attention, which means you are present and controlled, and you do not let the room see you feel anything even if what you are feeling is the specific, complicated weight of 8 years of silence finally being spoken out loud by someone else's voice in a room full of people who were told it was a costume. When she finished, she closed the folder. She looked at Patricia Voss. Not because she knew who Patricia was, but because Patricia was the only person in the room who had not moved at all since the general started reading, and stillness draws the eye when it is the wrong kind. Then she looked back at me. "Sergeant First Class Voss," she said, "thank you for your service." She extended her hand. I walked across the room and I shook it. Nobody spoke for a long moment after the general released my hand. Bill Eckhart began to clap, then the mill friends, then the cousins, then the room. It happened in sections the way a fire catches, first one point, then another until the whole thing is lit. I did not look at Patricia. I looked at Daniel. He was standing. He had stood at some point during the reading. I hadn't noticed the exact moment, but he was on his feet. His face was doing something complicated. His jaw was tight. His eyes were bright. He looked like a man who had just understood the specific dimensions of a mistake he had been making for 3 years, not all at once but in pieces, and the pieces had just assembled themselves in front of 23 witnesses into something he could no longer look at sideways. He didn't speak. There was nothing in the room yet where his voice could fit. I picked up my beret from the table. I settled it on my head. I straightened it once, 2 fingers above the right eyebrow, the way I had been doing it for 11 years. I turned to Brigadier General Accusation. I thanked her. She said she was glad she had stopped. One of the 2 officers who had come in with her asked if I was still serving. I said I was in my final year. He handed me a card. I took it. I shook Bill Eckhart's hand. Then I walked toward the door. Daniel said my name, just once. "Elena." I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I let the sound of my name and his voice sit in the air for a moment. Then I turned. He was standing between the table and where I was. Patricia was still seated. She had not looked up. Gerald had his hand over his mouth. Janet Haverson was looking at the tablecloth. "I'm going to get some air," I said. "I'll come with you," he said. "Give me a few minutes." He nodded. He sat back down. I walked out of the VFW hall and stood in the parking lot in the November air with my hands at my sides and my beret on my head. The cold was the clean kind, the kind that makes your face feel rinsed. There were stars above the parking lot lights. Someone had left a small wreath on the door of the hall, plastic holly and a red ribbon, tilted slightly to the left. I was not angry. What I felt was something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of something unresolved for years finally resolving itself, not cleanly, not gently, but completely. The way a bone that has been set wrong finally gets set right. It hurts more the second time, but after it is straight. Patricia did not apologize that night. She did not apologize the week after, or the week after that. What she did, eventually, through Daniel, was send a card. The card said that she had not intended to cause harm. It said she had been worried about her son. It said she hoped we could move forward. I kept the card. I did not respond to it. Daniel and I had a long conversation, several long conversations, in the weeks after Veterans Day. I told him about the 8 months of that deployment. I told him about the 14th of April. I told him what I had been carrying and what I had not been permitted to share and what I had been waiting to find the right way to say. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always valued about him, and which I had not forgotten even in the weeks when I was trying to understand why he hadn't spoken. I asked him once, only once, why he hadn't said anything when his mother was talking. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know how to stop her, and I told myself you were handling it, and I was wrong." I told him that was accurate. We are still married. It has not been simple. The thing Patricia did in that room changed the particular geometry of our family, not just between me and her, but between Daniel and me, and between Daniel and his understanding of what he owes the person he chose. He has done the work of understanding that. I am watching him do it. I am not finished deciding what that means for us long-term, and I think it is honest to say that. The bronze star with Valor Citation is framed now. It is on the wall in our home office, next to the shelf where it sat in its envelope for 6 weeks while I looked for the right words. I don't need the right words anymore. The general read them for me. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever been in a room where someone said something about you that was completely wrong and you had to decide whether to speak or to wait for the truth to arrive on its own terms, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done. And if you believe that silence is not weakness, that sometimes it is a classified record, a folded beret, and the knowledge that the room will come to you, subscribe to silent revenge stories. We will be here. Every story is fictional and created for entertainment storytelling purposes.